Alrighty, let's do this thing, everybody. This is Two Tails, and I'm your host, Gavin Miles. And this podcast breaks down hunting and fly fishing with a boots on the ground and a flies on the water perspective. My goal is simple. It's to keep it entertaining, practical, and to help you elevate your skills to make every outing count. Well, before we jump into it today, I want to point out something. I wanted to point you guys out. And I'm really, really grateful, super thankful for all the fun conversations I've had about this podcast, about the different episodes, the stories, the storytelling, the takeaways, the lessons. I'm super grateful for you guys who tune in every week to tune in to hear different stories and skills and how you guys can adapt your approaches in the outdoors. And thank you. I just wanted to say thank you. I've had a lot of great conversations, a lot of fun with this. So I hope that you guys continue to tune in and continue to give me your feedback so that I can adapt and adjust to understand what you guys want out of this podcast, right? This is for you guys. And anyways, just from the bottom of my heart, thank you. I really appreciate it. Very blessed to be able to do these. And I look forward to them every week so that I can keep in touch with you guys. And let's jump right into it today with no more delay. So today's topic that I have in mind is figuring out what to do when the kitchen sink no longer works, okay? And for those of you who might not know what I'm referring to as the kitchen sink for this, just to be blatant and be clear, it's your fly box, okay? Kind of an analogy here. We're going to relate the kitchen sink to the fly box. And yes, I'm talking the nitty gritty, all of it, the dirty dishes, if you will, okay, of this week is the kitchen sink being related to your fly box. My story for you, right? Always start with a story, go to the story takeaways, and jump into some main talking points later. But my story for you today is shout out to my brothers. I was out on a local river here in Utah, a tailwater, and a pretty heavily pressured tailwater, if you will. For those of you who might not know what a tailwater is, it's pretty simple. A tailwater is just a river created through coming out of a lake, out of a dam, so it's pretty controlled. The flows are, they fluctuate given the season, but they're always pretty steady given that season, okay? So in this particular day, it was a cold winter's day, right? Just like we're experiencing right now, we're in the winter time. And it was actually in February. So this is pretty good timing here, or so I would like to think. And I was out there with my brothers, cold day, but it was a sunny day, right? There weren't many clouds out. There was a little bit of snow on the ground, and the sun was shining on the river. So it made for some very active fish, right? So with this sunny, cold February day, that sun was penetrating through the water and helping the water column warm up just enough to where we experienced an actual hatch, okay? And man, this hatch got the fish fired up. They were going crazy. They were chasing these bugs all throughout the water column. And this is something we're going to touch on a little bit later in this episode, but the different types of takes, right? How they're eating the bugs, where they're eating the bugs, and how to approach that. But they were on the top water, they were eating emergers, they were down in the bottom. Just about anywhere you could reach with a fly, you could find a fish. And it was made for a really fun day of fishing. And like I said, it was sunny, so the sun was out, we were getting some vitamin D, and it was amazing. So we started out on the river this day, and I started tossing out one of my favorite patterns, just kind of my go-to, and it wasn't working for me. And I was kind of left scratching my head after, 10, 15, 20 minutes maybe of watching fish let it go past, rejecting it, looking at it, seeing it float by and saying, nope, I don't want that today. And so I changed out my fly and I put on another pattern from the kitchen sink, right, from the fly box, and that one didn't work either. 10, 15 more minutes go by, nothing was working. And I was like, okay. Well, I changed out my whole rig, right? I was running a 2-fly rig, and I thought maybe let's just give them something completely new. So I snipped those 2 flies off and tied 2 new flies from my fly box, and same. I was like, these fish are so active. Why aren't they taking any of these patterns, right? And you have your confidence flies and your not so confident flies, and you've got your flies, right? Those flies that you're like, maybe these are kind of experimental at best. But I had filtered through most of my confidence flies at this point for winter fishing, at least. I still had a couple, and then I was starting to get into those other grade of flies out of the kitchen sink. And I was thinking to myself, okay, what's going on here? These fish don't seem to be very picky. They're eating all these types of bugs, right? It was a midge hatch in the middle of February. And so I was trying my best to mimic the midges, and I just couldn't figure it out, right? So it didn't seem like anything was working. I had filtered through maybe 2 more complete rigs, right? I had tied on maybe 4 more flies. And that's kind of where the frustration started to come into play, right? It went from curiosity and not understanding necessarily what was happening to, okay, why is this not working, right? That frustration mindset. And then I just threw everything at him. I just, anything I had in my fly box, I was like, take this, take that, take this, take that. And it was just, I was relentless in my fly patterns. Unbeknownst to me, it wasn't about my fly patterns. And this is the whole prowess behind today's episode, is it's less to do with your fly pattern and more to do with your presentation, okay? But in this whole, that kind of continued on, this trend continued on for maybe an hour and a half. And I was just thinking to myself, okay, slow down, take a break, focus on the feeding frenzy, the feeding pattern, how these fish are interacting in the water column, and then amend your approach to get to where the fish are at, right? You got to meet the fish halfway, if you will. Right on the borderline is where they're going to wait for me, right? To amend to change the words of the famous song. But once I changed my approach, I put on my 2 confidence flies again. I changed that approach, put on the original flies that I was fishing with, and booyah, baby, got right back into them. Bingo, it was like 1 fish. 5 minutes later, another fish. 5 minutes later, a 3rd fish. And it was just like clockwork, you guys. Once I had realized my original presentation wasn't going to work, I had forgotten about the kitchen sink. I had actually reverted back to the original flies I was going with. And that's when it started to click, right? So an hour after the frustration, I took my couple of steps back, theoretical steps back. I waited. I was patient. I looked at the fish, figured out what the fish were doing, what they were after, the flies they were after. And that's when I got into the success, okay? A lot of times we can get wrapped up in the nitty gritty, the picky, if you will, the dirty dishes of the kitchen sink, what's going to work, what's not going to work, and it can be very frustrating. I have been there. So let's jump into some of these story takeaways, if you will. First one for you guys, forget the kitchen sink. Please, 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 please forget the kitchen sink, okay? Forget all about your fly box. It's not about your fly box. It's about the fish, okay? It's about the fish. Don't get overwhelmed by all the patterns that you have. Yes, I totally understand that fly boxes are gorgeous. They're pretty. They're fun to look at. Oftentimes, I will totally geek out and go down a rabbit hole, a tangent, if you will, open my fly box and just look at the patterns, the colors, the fun, the streamers, the flies, the dries, the nymphs, all of it, right? I get so caught up in just how pretty fly boxes can be because they can be really pretty, right? It's an art. And I appreciate a full fly box just as much as the next guy. But when you're on the water, you've got to find the one fly that's going to work. And it might not take as much as you think, right? You might not have to throw out all of the fly patterns to find that one. So anyways, I digress. Let's get back on topic. Forget the kitchen sink, okay? Don't get overwhelmed by all the patterns And there's a lot of patterns out there that might be more so catchy for the fly angler than for the fish, okay? So that's takeaway number one. Takeaway numero dos, okay? Number two is remember the recipe. And there's a couple of sub takeaways, if you will, so hang in there with me. Remembering the recipe is twofold. The first is by matching the hatch, okay? In this story, I referenced that the hatch was a midge hatch, okay? So I was trying to mimic different stages of a midge, the larva stage down in the bottom with a nymph, maybe the emerger pattern kind of in the top half, the top third of the water column, and even adults on the water surface. So I was trying to mimic these different phases of the hatch so as to match the hatch. Now, this is kind of where the second sub takeaway, if you will, comes into play. There's kind of three things that go into matching the hatch. And if you've been in fly fishing for a while, if you're new to it, I'll introduce this idea to you. But I'm sure you've heard of it before. The three things are size, shape, and color. Okay, and they all interact independently of each other, but also codependently of each other. And it's kind of just this interweaving of different shapes, sizes, and colors. Yes, they'll have their different effects on the fish. Maybe contrast playing into the color there will draw more attention to the fish's eye. Maybe the shape's a little bit off. Maybe the size is too small, too big. And you really got to try to hone in on what these fish are looking for. So remember the recipe, okay? We're talking kitchen etiquette here. We're forgetting the kitchen sink and we're trying to remember the recipe. The recipe, I would say, is matching the hatch. Well, how do we match the hatch? Those three simple things: size, shape, color, okay? Well, if you can do that and you can figure out what bug is hatching at the time, you can match it as closely as you can, you'll find success. I promise. I would love to hear your stories, your experiences. And so please drop them down in the comments or reach out to me. I would love to hear those stories of how you were able to match the hatch and how you didn't get overwhelmed by the kitchen sink. Okay, you could really focus in and hone in onto what those fish were looking for. So let's get into some talking points, maybe some main talking points that might not be as related to the story. But my first talking point for you guys today is see what's happening on the water, okay? And really focus on it. Not just, oh yeah, I gave it a glance as I was walking down to the riverside and yeah, I didn't see any fish, so I just figured I'd go subsurface, right? I'd go down in the deep. But take your time and understand the feeding frenzy. I mentioned in the story, the fish were going crazy. The water was finally warming up. They were active. They were chasing bugs. They were all over in the water column. And it was a frenzy. It really was a frenzy. So take the time, dissect a little bit, be a surgeon, if you will, of the water surface, the water column, the fish themselves, their interactions with the bugs. You'll be able to tell a lot more than you realize if you be patient and give it some time. Just observing. Okay, I promise you. And I get really antsy when I do this. I'm like, okay, I know what the fish are doing, and I really want to get out on the water, but sometimes it's a little bit of haste, and that can come back to haunt me. So I'm going to give you guys maybe some 3 tips. I'm giving you guys a lot of lists, right? The 3 things to remember: shape, size, color. The don't get overwhelmed with your fly box, the kitchen sink, and anyways, you ready for another list? I hope so, because it's coming. First of all, to understand the feeding frenzy, we need to understand the different takes, if you will, how the fish are eating and where they're eating. So bear with me, top to bottom of the water column, okay? As we read the river, we're going to go from surface to kind of that middle section to the bottom of the water column, okay? And the takes look different. The way that fish eat in these different sections of the river or depths of the river look different. And that's what I want to get into here with you guys. The first take we'll talk about is top water action, okay? Love it. It is so awesome. Gets the adrenaline rushing. It just is so exhilarating to see a fish come up and just crush a fly, okay? Even if it doesn't crush it, it's so cool to see him sipping flies off the top, right? The little delicate approach, how they try not to give themselves away as they come up, and the sneaky, stealthy assassin just gulps or slurps in these bugs. It's so cool. The way to figure out, to differentiate, if you will, between a topwater take and a subsurface take, if it's an emerger or an adult, is how much of the fish you can see, okay? If you can see a head of the fish come out of the water, then that's a clue. If you can see head and dorsal fin of the fish come out of the water, that's a clue. If you can see the whole fish, well, obviously that's a topwater take, right? Little sub story for you, mini story, is I was fishing this little creek and it was in the high mountains, and I was trying to pull my flies out of the water. It looked like a little fly floating, if you will, and one of these little brook trout, really aggressive trout, by the way, brook trout, they are very opportunistic fish, and my fly was maybe 4, 5, 6 inches off of the water, off of the top of the water, and he came all the way out of the water like a shooting missile, a skyrocket, and ate my fly midair, right? Crazy story. I love that. I love that story, and brook trout are my favorite trout, by the way. Anyways, if you can see obvious parts of the fish's body, and I would argue the result of the water surface, you'll know it's top water. So if they're doing these little slurps, these little delicate takes, it can be a little bit harder to discern if it's top water or subsurface. So here's the key. If there are bubbles, it's top water. If there are ripples, it's subsurface, okay? So if you can see the fish, and if there's air bubbles on the top of the water, you know it's top water. Because the fish is coming up, opening its mouth, introducing oxygen into the top of the water column, into the surface film, and creating a turbulence between the flow of the river and creating turbulence there on the top of the water by introducing the oxygen into the surface flow or surface film of the water. So that's top water take. These subsurface takes can be very similar to topwater takes depending on how deep they are in the water column. Okay, so I'm going to say these subsurface takes are kind of that middle of the water column, the top third. And if you're seeing fins, dorsal fins, but not a head, that to me is leading me to think, okay, that's subsurface. Maybe they're taking an emerger rather than an adult. Maybe they're taking a nymph that's gotten turned up in the rapids and is, floating towards the top. It's subsurface though. Another key, an important note to make in discerning these two is if it's ripples rather than bubbles, okay? So the bubbles come from, like I mentioned, the fish opening its mouth, introducing the water. The ripples occur when the fish is coming up to the top, doesn't break the surface, but then maybe a fin comes out. And the flow of the river washes over that fish and creates a ripple effect on the top of the water, right? That is a fish taking an emerger, subsurface. Okay, the third, so that's the first two of our list. The third take is the white wink. And oh my goodness, this is probably one of my favorite things of fly fishing is when you're sight fishing and you can actually see the white wink. When the fish opens its mouth and engulfs the fly in the bottom of the river, and you set the hook and you feel the tug. Oh, that is one of my favorite things about fly fishing. Okay, this though can also be with emergers as they're kind of transitioning between their nymphal stage to that emerger phase, and they're rising in the water column. You'll still be able to see that white wink, and that's really good for knowing when to set, the timing of the set, if you will. So there you have it, the three different phases, the different takes that you can observe in a fish: topwater takes, subsurface takes, and kind of the nymph take, if you will. Hot take, nymph take is the best, but that little white wink, look for it. Don't rush it. Don't jump the white wink. Wait for the complete white wink, okay? This is, I'm trying to get to the point of, if you set too early, if you set when you see the white wink, you're just going to be pulling flies out of fish's mouths. That's not what we want to do as fly anglers, right? We want to set when the white wink is over. So you'll see it, they'll close their mouth. That's when you pull, that's when you set. And more often than not, you'll have a fish on the end of your line. Well, let's wrap things up here. To leave you guys with my leaving lesson for this week: forget the kitchen sink. Don't get overwhelmed. Figure out the feeding frenzy. Thanks, guys. We'll see you soon.